Welcome to another episode of Hoopsology. I am Justin Goodrum, joined by Matt Thomas. What's up, Matt?
What's up, Justin? I'm doing well. How are you?
Good, good. We're in video form. What do you think?
I love it. Good to see you. It's a little more natural this way, getting to see you rather than
Right?
kind of being on a more glorified phone call with you on Skype. So
Yeah.
it's good to see your reactions. And great job with that interview, by the way, with Eric.
Yeah, appreciate it. He was a wonderful guest. I don't know if you ever watched the show. It's called Power. It's 50 Cent produced it. It's on Stars, kind of like a crime drama. He
Mm.
was a big fan of that. We're chatting about that before we got into the interview. I was addicted to that show, like I was telling him for a good couple of months. I couldn't stop watching it. And now they're making all these spinoffs. So we're talking about that. I'm chopping it up before we get into the interview. But he had a lot of great knowledge. It was great listening to him, and we'll hopefully have him as a guest in the future again. It was like a really great talk.
Yeah, I'd love to get a chance to pick his brain in the future as well. So very cool. Hope you guys listening enjoyed that interview as well.
For sure. And along with his interview, we have plenty of other interviews for you to check out coming up on our YouTube page and also, of course, our podcast feed. So make sure you go check that out. And we'll have details once we're done with our main show as to the Pacific guests on our feed as well. So, man, let's hop into it and break down the league. We're in the midst of it. And of course, we have to talk about James Harden. As I mentioned with Eric, you would think with Harden and all of the distractions and the trade rumors, his numbers were to decrease. But actually, he's been performing really well over the first three games. 37 points, about 5 rebounds, 11 assists, MVP like numbers. Um, Here's a quote from Sam Amichek and Kelly Ayoko of The Athletic. Internally, there is a growing belief that Harden could end up staying in Houston for the entire season, if not longer. Untenable though it may seem. So I guess because we talked to Eric, I did in terms of what his future is in terms of this season and the seasons beyond. But what do you make of this man? Because I have to admit I was totally wrong about this in terms of his performance. I thought it was going to be a huge distraction. I ultimately think that his numbers were to decrease, but he's a scoring machine, and I guess based on Eric's analysis, I agree with him. You know, he's a MVP like player. So what do you make of his performance so far? And more importantly, do you think he'll be able to keep this up through all the distractions and through meshing with John Wall and DeMarcus Cousins?
Well, it seems like I don't imagine now that we've seen this production and now that he's kind of in the flow of actually being at practice and those kinds of things. I think we'll see the production continue. He still wants to be traded. He did say with regards to Coach Steven Silas, who was given the game ball by John Wall after his first coaching victory against the Kings 2 games ago for the Rockets. James Harden said, let's see how many wins we can get. But I don't put a lot of stock into that. I also don't put a lot of stock into this messaging from Sam Amick and that report from The Athletic. It sounds to me like something that an organization would put out in order to increase trade value and get better trade assets and ensure that happens. So I do think that obviously, I mean, I wouldn't have been shocked if James Harden was traded before the season began, and now it's going to be, I think, a waiting game in that we're going to need to see some of these top trade contenders or kind of people in the mix that Harden has put on his list. We're going to need to see some of them struggle a little more significantly, like maybe Milwaukee drop a few games and get the urge to add to their star power, or especially Philadelphia, who sits on top of the Eastern Conference right now. I think with Daryl Morey, and that's really still my belief to where Harden will be going before the trade deadline is up, just because of his relationship with Daryl Morey and how much it seems like Daryl Morey wants to reunite with him, in spite of also having said mixed things about Ben Simmons. I think that's not going to happen in a situation where the Sixers only have one loss. They're going to want to see where this roster goes under new coaching, new direction in the front office. But so I guess that's the big surprise is we're going to be waiting a little while longer to see where James Harden goes. But this whole thing has just been crazy. Um, and I wanted to ask you, one of the popular topics on many other podcasts this week and kind of around the media is, would you trade Jaylen Brown or maybe like a Michael Porter Jr. if you're looking at Boston and Denver being potential trade destinations? I know James Harden has said that he's cool with going to Boston. I don't know if the same is true for Denver. Regardless, if you were either of those organizations, would you be willing to part with some of that young talent in order to acquire James Harden?
It's so tough. I don't know if you listened to Bill Simmons, and he was talking about Jaylen Brown and how I believe Kimba Walker he's been hurt, so Jaylen Brown's been getting more of the reps, and his numbers have been really solid. And it seems like when he's able to perform without like Kyrie Irving or you know Kimba Walker or I believe Isaiah Thomas in the beginning where he's able to assert himself as the main ball handler, he performs well. So it's tough to say also because James Harden has a less than stellar record in the playoffs, and that's ultimately the end game, right? I mean, the regular season that the Celtics have performed, they've done that already, been there, done that, performed well. So the question is, can he win you a title? And ultimately, that's a risk. I would say with James Harden, trying to mesh him with Jason Tatum, that's going to be a question mark, as well as Kemba Walker. If you were to trade for him, it's a huge risk. Um, if I'm running Boston's front office, I know this may seem unpopular. I would kind of see where the Jaylen Brown, Kemba, Jason Tatum combo goes before making that drastic of a move. In my favor, I just don't think James Harden has proven it where it counts. It's kind of the eye test. It's kind of like when I was talking to Eric regarding Ben Simmons in terms of if he's like an elite superstar player like LeBron. We you know, you're, you, myself, Eric, people that are hardcore fans. We know who's the superstars in this league. I mean, it's pretty obvious. And so far, unfortunately for James Harden, he has not been able to prove it when it counts the most. So I just don't see it as a worthwhile move for the Celtics to make at this point. With Philly, I think that's a little bit of a different story. I looking at Ben Simmons, I've always thought he's overrated. I don't understand with Eric alluded to it again how he needs to work on his shot and to make that comparison to LeBron James in which he's not like a stellar shooter. However, like you take a look at LeBron, he had this long streak of consecutive 10-point games, and the only times he hasn't done it was some playoff games here or there throughout his career. But the regular season, he's been so consistent. I just think it's kind of a joke to compare him to LeBron from a superstar standpoint when the guy can't shoot. I don't know if you saw on Twitter, but they were celebrating his third three-pointer of his career. Of his career. Like, what are we doing here? So to me, my point is, if you're Philadelphia, and I get it with, huh?
I'm sorry, I said once a year you get to celebrate a Ben Simmons 3-pointer.
I don't understand. I mean, if he was like a big man, if he was like Joel Embiid, that makes a lot more sense. But I understand, again, referring to the interview with Eric, like he's big for his position. However, it's like if we're going to compare him to one of the greatest players ever, and people are saying the greatest of all time, LeBron, like this guy needs to be able to shoot. Am I missing something? I mean, I just don't understand. That's why I asked Eric that question. I'm like, am I like delusional? I feel like I'm in a twilight zone. Everybody knows something that I don't know. So I think relating this to James Harden, I think you make that trade in a heartbeat, personally, just because there's a lot of question marks regarding Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid, like we alluded to in the interview. Like he is injury prone, so that's a situation in which, with Embiid, as much as I like him, as much as I would pick him over Ben Simmons, you never know when he could go down for good. And having that James Harden trade ensures your franchise continues to be a contender, especially in the East. So, from a Philly standpoint, I think you make that move at all cost.
And ironically, it's As you say this, and we kind of review Ben Simmons in my mind, he could be the fit that they need in Brooklyn because he's an outstanding defender.
Yes,
If you have to
1000%.
say one thing, he is an elite level defender, and they need defense in Brooklyn. And he's a
Sure.
guy that we know doesn't like to take shots with the game on the line, or certainly hasn't proven himself to be that guy. We know he can get to the basket, which is useful, but man, a guy who would be a playmaker who can dish to KD and Kyrie being actually a very decent catch and shoot player, although he prefers to dominate the ball. Ben Simmons could be an interesting fit in Brooklyn. Now, of course, nobody's talking about that, and that would have to be maybe something that could happen in a three-team trade. But it seems more and more to me like if we're going to go the Philly or the Brooklyn route, it is going to be some type of three-team trade because you can't pair Ben Simmons and John Wall together, in my opinion. And we've talked about this before on the show. So, um, I think it's the other thing that I wanted to ask with and kind of another angle. Because I agree with a lot of your points about Ben Simmons. I would be curious to see how he does running an offense where he doesn't have Joel Embiid potentially clogging up the lane. That's what I would be curious to see. I'm definitely not saying that I believe that's going to be like the end all be all, like all of a sudden he's leading teams to championships. No, definitely not. But I think that's where his potential appeal is. We don't have any proof that that's going to lead to, finals victories and things like that. So 100% agree with you there. But another component of this James Harden trade that kind of is perplexing to me is, I like if you look at a culture that they've established in Boston. I mean, you have Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, guys that are successful on both sides of the ball. They're great defenders and they're great scorers. Um, I just don't see any team that James Harden goes to where he improves the team from a culture standpoint. And I think that is problematic when you are the Rockets and you're trying to get trade value for him because if like Brooklyn is interested, well, he's not going to be the number one guy there potentially. I mean, that really should be KD being the leader of that team. You look in a situation like Boston, maybe he has enough clout and he's older than their stars that they have. We know Jason Tatum or Jaylen Brown, I mean, both pretty young guys. Um, so maybe he would have some more pull there, but is that a good thing? And if you think of like the Denver Nuggets, is that a good thing for James Harden, excuse me, being the top dog of those franchises? I'm definitely not sold on that, and I wonder if that is part of what is holding up this trade process.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see his in terms of the culture that is questionable, just because what we've seen from a COVID standpoint, let alone from the other aspects of what's going on. So that'll be interesting as well. Did you have any other points? I'm set to move on if you are.
Just that, ironically, the Rockets are a very fun, at least watch right now. They've only beat the Kings for their two wins, so the Kings are a decent basketball team, but you certainly can't put a lot of weight into that. But over 4 games, Christian Wood's numbers are also very impressive, along with James Harden numbers in his games. So it's kind of funny because this Christian Wood piece may be one of the best pairings James Harden has had, but I do think that the damage has been done in Houston and he's gone. Um, I still think before the trade deadline, even with this report from Sam Emick, and of course I don't have an internal source or things like that, but typically, historically, once we've seen the damage done in these situations, teams don't tend to hang on to a player hoping for things to get better. They usually try to deal before chemistry issues cause things to get much worse.
Yeah. Well, we'll just have to wait and see how that plays out. But it's certainly a compelling story, and I kind of like the twist that he's actually performing well. So we'll have to continue to talk about it every single week.